Hello everyone, I am Dr. Satyanarayan Rao and welcome to my video, and today we will look at a concept known as potential natural vegetation. So potential natural vegetation is a concept that helps us understand how natural a vegetation is. Like if we imagine we have a forest where all sorts of plants grow with no fertilizers, no human interference, just its pure nature. Potential natural vegetation is a concept that actually characterizes this naturalness of a forest or a vegetation. So it helps us see that if the vegetation in a site is as nature intended, or in other words, it tells us that if the area's vegetation is native or has been altered by human activity, and this knowledge is very important for ecological restoration and conservation. So because our ecosystems are tightly linked, if one plant species suffer, it can impact entire food chain and affecting everything from insects to larger animals and ultimately our environment. And so it's very important to understand this potential natural vegetation concept. And so in this video we will see how scientists determine potential natural vegetation. It actually starts with collecting data and then using tools like GIS for mapping and site characterization, and then we do some modeling approaches to actually understand vegetation patterns and dynamics, how they evolve in nature without human interaction. And so we will understand by the end of this video why potential natural vegetation is a key to protect and understand our natural world. So let's see what potential natural vegetation really is. It's not an index, but it is actually a concept that is used in ecology to describe the vegetation that would likely exist in a given area if human influences were removed completely and the natural ecological processes were allowed to proceed without any human interferences. So this potential natural vegetation is actually a model, we can say, or a hypothesis of what the natural vegetation would be based on ecological knowledge. It's not measured directly but actually is inferred from various ecological and environmental data. And so data collection is a very important part of understanding or getting the potential natural vegetation. It's also not a single number, like for example, it's not like a leaf area index or some reflective index, but it's described in terms of vegetation types and classes, what vegetation would potentially dominate the landscape under natural conditions. So it's basically it's not a single number. It's actually used as a baseline to guide conservation efforts, land use planning, and ecological restoration projects. So for example, the potential natural vegetation concepts helps us understand what the vegetation should naturally be. And so ecologists can make informed decision about how to manage and restore an area. To determine the potential natural vegetation, scientists use data like soil type, climate, existing vegetation distributions, and also historical record if they are available, and some remote sensing tools to actually bin the different plant species, find their distributions. And finally, we also use certain modeling approaches to predict how vegetation would respond over time, and we will see how briefly the modeling approaches. So to understand the concept of potential natural vegetation, let's consider an hypothetical scenario of where we are studying a forest, and so we need to take data, and we will send a team of 4 people to the forest to collect this information. So what these people will do is they will go to the forest, they will identify which plants are present, noting how abundant each species is, and collecting their distribution patterns and other information. They will also take soil type data, moisture levels, groundwater table, and where are the rivers lakes, water bodies, and all this information, including the elevation and how altitudes affect vegetation patterns. So we need also to collect the elevation data. So once we have all this data, including the plant species distribution, the soil data, the moisture level, the water bodies, the elevation, we obviously need tools like GIS or Geographic Information System to actually pin down precise sampling location and also to create spatial relationship between vegetation and environmental factors. Like for example, if the distance to the water bodies or a lake has some effect on certain species. It's also a tool just to visualize the forest map and to understand or to overlay different types of data like soil conditions or vegetation data and other information in a visually appealing way. And that's why we use GIS in the potential natural vegetation analysis. And once we have the GIS data system ready, we can also do relationship between species and the environmental variables. For instance, as I already said, for example, if certain species can thrive only under certain soil moisture conditions, or at higher elevations certain types of grass grow, or does certain environmental condition favor certain species? That's the question that can be answered using such data. And to understand this analysis, like how the vegetation type and the environmental variables like soil moisture interact, we can use something called as correlative analysis, which we will see in detail in the next few sections. But basically in correlative analysis, what we do is that we study or examine the relationship between species that are present in the forest and its abundance with the environmental variables. For instance, what kind of species is present at certain soil moisture level, or maybe at below a threshold of soil moisture, certain species can be absent, which means like climate change, if the soil moisture reduces on average due to climate change and other natural disaster, it affects certain species, not all the species. So it helps us understand, for example, if the soil moisture level is 0.25 and we don't find a particular species at all regions that have soil moisture below 0.25, which means that the soil moisture has to be above this level for that species to survive. And so if we have to make conservative approaches, like we have to restore a forest ecosystem, so we have to bring that species back to the forest. It means that we have to maintain this level of soil moisture. And so this is where the correlative analysis will be helpful, and we will see in more detail, like we can use tools like R and statistics libraries to do such. And we also employ mechanistic approaches to actually understand the processes that drive these vegetation patterns. So for instance, when we have a forest, we see certain distributions of different species across the spatial grid, and there is some pattern that is linked to the environmental variables like resources, like competition for resources like water, and also physiological responses to different environmental conditions. To understand these things, to understand the biological and ecological interactions between the vegetation and the environment, we also do some mechanistical modeling to understand these vegetation patterns in the forest. And so from all this observation, we can make an inference about the vegetation that would naturally occur without human interferences. And also using historical data, we can say that due to climate change, these are the species that are going extinct, and this is how we should restore it. And it also helps us to set restoration targets for degraded areas. And that's the reason potential natural vegetation is a commonly used analysis to establish conservation priorities. And so in the next few slides, let's see what are the tools that are available that we can use apart from the data collection. So there are like plenty of interesting data sets that we can use to practice our ecological modeling concepts like we described in this video. One such dataset is from the University of Reading, known as the Biome 6000 dataset. And as I am browsing through this dataset's web page, and so this is actually an interesting dataset to practice correlative analysis and other concepts that we described earlier in this video. And this dataset is structured with vegetation data across multiple time periods and is available for free, and it's also open source, which is very good for academic and research purposes. For example, it contains data on species composition, what kind of plant species are there, climate variables, and also geographical coordinates. And let's see how we can use Vegan Library, a powerful tool in R, to conduct in-depth correlation analysis using the Biome dataset. And so, as I already told, this dataset is packed with data on species abundance across multiple sites, along with environmental variables like soil temperature, soil moisture, elevation, precipitation, soil pH, and organic matter content. And one thing that we can perform is species-environment relations. For example, using a method called canonical correspondence analysis, or CCA, we can examine how species distributions are influenced by environmental gradients. For example, how the changes in soil moisture or the soil temperature or even the soil organic composition can affect certain plants. For example, certain plants can thrive or certain plants can go extinct or struggle to survive. And this kind of analysis, the canonical correspondence analysis, will help us visualize and quantify this relationship, providing us like how environmental factors actually shape the plant communities and their distributions on the spatial grid. And not only that, we can also assess the environmental correlations to identify which factors mostly influences our plant communities. For instance, how soil moisture relates to species distributions. This can help us identify like drought tolerant species, like if we are trying to plan a park or a forest, we can know which species will survive for that kind of environment. It also helps us to predict how vegetations might change under climatic stress. Not only that, we can also use this Vegan library to test our hypothesis. Let's say I hypothesize that below 15% of soil moisture, this particular plant species will die and it will not survive. And how do I test my hypothesis? With the Vegan library, I can test this hypothesis by correlating soil moisture levels with this specific species presence. If the correlation will tell us that under this specific soil moisture, this species is absent, which actually proves that my hypothesis was correct. And so this tool, Vegan library, is a very robust tool. We can apply a range of statistical analysis to our ecological data. In a future video, I will actually walk through with some coding exercises on this dataset, but I will hopefully use some of these libraries like Vegan to perform correlative analysis. And for now, we just have an idea like what are the tools available to do correlation analysis. If you are into the mechanistic modeling of ecosystems, this Biome dataset is again a very great tool to practice our modeling skills. We will see like how we can use mechanistic approaches for using Biome dataset. Like what I mean by mechanistic approach is we model the processes such as biomass accumulation, water dynamics or temperature effects, how plants deal with limited resources or climatic stresses. All these processes like plant growth, for example, we can model it as a simple function, exponential function, or I can use machine learning approaches to just model how plant grows or how it responds to the soil water availability and how the biomass can accumulate. All these my ideas can be modeled as an algebraic equation or machine learning models. And so this is what I mean by mechanistic modeling, or it can also be based on some physics-based models like process-based models that actually does all kind of like plant growth, root growth and soil water uptake, solving Richards equation, all these things. So once we have this, the key outcome of such a mechanistic model would be like the vegetation structure or the leaf area index or the species compositions. Like if we have different rules for different plants and we set up the model, and the output will be like after like a season or as time goes by, we can see what plants survived, what plants died out because of the environmental conditions. And these are the outputs that we can actually verify with either experiments like going into the forest and checking with our data if the models actually match with the data, or we can also use biome dataset to validate our models. So we can compare what our models predict. We can actually validate with our biome dataset, and so it gives us an assurance that what's actually happening in the forest or in the real world is, according to the dataset, is what the model is predicting. So I think we have briefly touched upon the concepts of potential vegetative analysis, and actually this field is a very vast field, and we have just explored some parts of it, like what can correlation analysis do in the vegetative modeling, how to validate mechanistic approaches using publicly available datasets. So these were like just general ideas, not focused on any specific topic, because each of these ideas actually takes it deserves a video of its own. For example, correlative analysis needs 2-3 videos on their own to actually completely cover some of the topics. And even if we just want to talk about what vegan library can do in ecosystem modeling, it actually deserves like 2 to 3 videos to cover properly all the concepts. And even same goes for the biome dataset, which also deserves a dedicated video. And so this is a very vast topic, and I just scratched the tip of the iceberg, I think, and there is more to explore, and I will actually hopefully plan to make videos on these concepts as things progresses, and hopefully I will make more videos on this topic. Till then, a very happy new year of 2025, and take care. And thank you very much for watching my video, and remember to keep learning and enjoy life. Thank you.